Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Casual Sports Podcast, Matt's birthday edition. He's coming in from Hollywood, Florida on his birthday here. Giving him the main screen as well for it as well, since it's his birthday.
We should leave like this the whole time he's on.
It might as well, right? Everyone wants to see the beautiful weather in Florida.
They don't care about us.
Right. They want to see the palm trees, the beach.
Look at that.
Nice.
Look, we got our lifeguard over here. He's been blowing his whistle all day, man.
Probably at you, right?
A couple times, yeah. I was going out too far, and he was blowing his whistle. I'm like, come on, man.
All right. Well, Matt, I guess before we get any further into the show, besides a happy birthday, let's go ahead and give out your awards since we're only keeping you on for a little bit today so you can enjoy the rest of your vacation. And we'll see you on the show next week. But, Matt, we got to hand it out. Who is this week's Meathead of the Week?
Meathead of the Week, honorable mention. We got to go to that, Mike. I know it happens, but Pirates got their all-star pitcher in there.
This isn't even worth an honorable mention.
He blows the game to the Marlins, one of like the worst teams in baseball. Okay?
No, they're not.
They're pretty bad still.
That's not even worth an honorable mention.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. No, it's not.
Yes, it is. How do you make the all-star team and do that? But how about who are they playing here? The Kansas City Royals. They let Miguel Cabrera steal third, and then he made his way home after that too. So that's just some bad infield play. You had an old man. He's not really the skinniest guy in the baseball world either, and you let him steal third. And
maybe not the fastest, I think, is maybe where you're trying to go with that, Matt. Because
fastest.
There's some big boys that can move. He ain't one of them.
Tell you what, though, one of the biggest guys that I've seen that can move, Mike Vogelback, man. Vogelback for the Pirates. That dude can turn it on.
No, he can't. That defense was just bad. Do you see his sprint speed? That was like that was just
I saw that last night. He was booking it down the third base.
Yeah, that's like O'Neal Cruz jogging.
Yeah, probably.
Was his max speed.
Man, how about that? 92, what they clocked that throw? 92 miles an hour or so?
Something like that.
Matt, he beat that today.
Playing first base, I don't know how many 92-mile-an-hour throws I'd want to try and catch. That's an absolute rocket. And you don't have you have a semi-padded mid at first. It's nowhere near what those catchers are working with those 90-mile-an-hour fastballs. That's going to leave a stinger in there. He's going to end up breaking one of his first base hands at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Matt, I don't know what he had last night on that throw to second, but today they're playing right now. He had a throw that playing shortstop again. This one was 97.8 miles an hour.
They're playing right now.
It beat what he did last night.
Oh, wow.
Jeez.
That is the highest recorded throw from short in the StatCast era.
Joe, we should have went to the show today, or to the game today. I would have did the show right from the stadium.
All right, Matt. No, I just found a new Meathead of the Week here. I'm scrolling through Twitter as I do a lot of times during the show. This is a sports analyst at PFF College, which is just another sports reporting type site. And he put out top 10 quarterbacks in college football right now. This is Anthony Treesh. He had C.J. Stroud at number 4, and he had Caleb Williams and Spencer Rattler both ahead of C.J. Stroud on that list. Bryce Young was the number 1 guy, but to have C.J. Stroud right now, the Heisman frontrunner, number 1 quarterback in passer rating last season, pretty much was top 5 in every other statistical category, and you have him at the 4 spot behind a guy like Spencer Rattler, who, by the way, was absolute hot garbage last year, and Caleb Williams that really hasn't proved anything. Transferred out of Oklahoma to follow his head coach in Lincoln Riley to USC, and you have him as one of the top quarterbacks in football over a guy in C.J. Stroud who was finished 5th in the Heisman voting last year as a freshman, redshirt freshman. There's your Meathead of the Week right there, Anthony Treesh of PFF College reporting. So that right there, that's a quick hell no from me.
Oh yeah. All right.
So we got a couple of mentions there for honorable Meathead of the Week, but guys, let's get into a little bit more of this hot seat rankings that we were talking about a couple days ago. I had to miss the show yesterday. I'm back though. Matt, you weren't here when we were talking about it initially. If you were to look around college football right now and you had to put any specific coach or just team in general on the hot seat this season, who are you going with?
Tell you what, I'm going with, what's his name? I think Mario Cristobal, University of Miami. That dude is going to be on the hot seat. And I don't think
Immediately,
he
right?
can fix things down there. And, I tell you who they bring in after he's gone. Ed Orgeron, man. Orgeron down in Miami Beach. That'd be something.
So, Matt, you're putting Cristobal on a 1-year list here is what you're going.
Oh, yeah.
He's got 1 year to do something. I don't know if it's that short, but I do agree that I think he's on an early hot seat because we have seen Miami hold their coaches to a very short leash. The average tenure for a head coach in football is 3.8 years, and most of their coaches have not lasted that long. So now I do agree. I think Mario Cristobal is one of those guys that you have to watch out for to be on a very short leash. If he doesn't have rapid improvement right out the gate, I do think he's one of those guys that you kind of have to look at, like, is he going to be around in Miami next season? I think wherever he goes, he instantly makes that team better. But Miami, they've been a crapshoot for years at this point. They keep trying to make short-term fixes for a long-term problem. Mario Cristobal, unless he's given ample time to turn this program around like Dabo Swinney was with Clemson, then this program isn't going anywhere.
Well, I think that's the thing you got to take into consideration when you're trying to think who's on the hot seat here. Is Matt, where are you sideways?
Nah, we're just all going sideways.
Just let him look stupid. I think that's the thing with the coach you think are going to be on hot seat is that the universities, like you said, Alec, because Miami has been known recently to put guys on a short leash. So not only are you thinking teams that got to win that have not been successful, but are they at universities where the leash is short normally for anybody that's there? And I think that's understandable for Mario Cristobal. I think he's got a little bit. If it's me, I give him obviously more than 1 year because it's hard in college football. You got to be able to get your guys in because you're coming in with guys you really didn't recruit with. So I want to see what happens when guys like him or guys that are just starting out, because this last offseason, there was a lot of shuffling of head coaches. I think it was more parity that we've seen with guys going other places, guys that we didn't expect to leave. So I think with that, you got to give guys short leash to get their own guys in there.
One of my favorite coaches to watch here, it actually comes down in the SEC as well. New coach in at Florida from the Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns, Billy Napier, taking over for Florida this year. I love the move. They've been, I think, once again, a rising team in college football because they've had a lot of down years in Florida, especially after the departure of Urban Meyer so many years ago. They kind of felt like a team that struggled to refine their footing. They did go 6-7 last year. They've been putting some guys into the NFL, though, which I think is a big development thing. When you go to a school that has development and then you bring in a successful coach, if he can work together, combine those two aspects, then you do find some success. So Billy Napier is going to be a coach to watch. CBS put him on a hot seat rating of just 1. I think he's got some time. He has had some amazing season with the Cajuns, and I'm really excited to see what he can do in this upcoming season down in the SEC because they were 2-6 in conference play. But Florida at home last season was 5-1. So you got to keep that in mind. When they played at home last year, they were one of the best teams in football.
And hey, they were a team that started out hot too, and they fell apart.
And that swamp is a place. I mean, if they get a successful football team, that swamp is going to be rowdy.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Any other coaches that you're out here? How about we focus our attention over towards the Big Ten? Is there a place in the Big Ten that you think this head coach, he's on the edge, he's got a hot seat, something of that sort?
Even though he did beat Ohio State this year, I don't think Jim Harbaugh is out of that doghouse quite yet. I think he needs to have a mirror season like he did last year at Michigan, do the same thing again, then I would say he's out of it. I mean, he's been there, 5-6 years, and he only beat Ohio State once?
Well,
so,
7 years, actually, Matt. He's been there for 7 years.
7? Oh, yeah.
He's
so,
one.
My thing is, though, with Harbaugh is that I know he's been there 7 years now, but I think it took him long enough to accomplish it. But I think last year he did a lot of things that we keep asking him to do. Make Michigan relevant. Make go beat Ohio State. Go
win the Big Ten championship.
Win the Big Ten championship
against Michigan in the modern era. They had not won a Big Ten championship football game.
Yeah,
they had never even played in one.
And although they lost, they got in the playoff. So I think last year they accomplished a lot of things that
they beat Iowa.
Yeah, they get in the playoff and they lose. But I think last year they did a lot of things that we've been asking them to do. I mean, obviously, can he come back and do it again? It's going to be hard. It's Big Ten stuff.
In my opinion, he bought himself time. And as a head football coach in college football in a major university like that team up north in Ann Arbor, buying time is the most important thing because he's always going to be on a short leash. Any head coach at a major university is going to be on a short leash. If you can't accomplish things in a couple of years, then you are on the way out. He wasn't accomplishing things, and they were about ready to kick him out the door. He beat his rivals. He got to the playoffs. He won a Big Ten title. He bought himself, in my opinion, another 2 years to repeat it. Much like Ed Orgeron down in LSU. He won a national title. He bought himself after 2 years. He couldn't do anything else with the team. They were average, then below average, and then he got shown the door for Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. The leash stays short. You have to have repeat success to stay in college football. That's the biggest thing. Repeat success is the thing. Harbaugh bought himself another couple of years and maybe put Ryan Day a little bit on the hot seat. In my own opinion, having Ryan Day as my head coach, I love him. Phenomenal recruiter. But the more and more we hear about potentially Brian Hartline being one of the favorite to become a head coach in college football or the NFL in the next couple of years, it does open the door. Ohio State's going to have a big decision to make. Do you want Ryan Day, a great offensive mind, one of the best offensive minds in college football, or do you want Brian Hartline, perhaps the best recruiter in all of college football? There's a big decision coming up, and if Ryan Day falls to Michigan again, I think it makes the decision a lot easier for the folks at Ohio State. Gene Smith is going to sit down at the end of the year if Ryan Day does not beat Michigan, and he's going to have that discussion. Day, you got one more year. You better hang 100 on them like you said you were going to in 2020, because since then you haven't won since you've made that comment. If Ohio State was to lose again, Ryan Day is now the guy on the hot seat, and Harbaugh bought himself another year. Especially because we're coming up on the addition of USC and UCLA into a Big Ten mega conference with 16 teams. You know Ohio State's going to want to put together a team to be the front runner, and that comes with the head coaching position.
So are you throwing Ryan Day into this conversation?
I am throwing Ryan Day in this conversation, the same conversation Jim Harbaugh was in, because now we're to the point Ryan Day has his recruits, right? We always talk 3 years. 3 years is your set, then it's go time. He has worked with Urban Meyer's guys the last 3 years, put together a record of 34-4, made the college football playoffs, and has won two Big Ten titles along the way. All fine and dandy. He did that with Meyer's players. We talked 3 years, then it's your time. Ohio State, they're celebrating 100 years in the Horseshoe. It's the 20th anniversary of the 2002 national championship team. The Horseshoe is getting a facelift with the new turf this year. Everything is set to launch Ryan Day's era. If he flops this season, if he comes out the gate, loses to Notre Dame 1 to a former Ohio State graduate assistant in Marcus Freeman, and then loses the final game of the season to his arch rival in Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, Ryan Day will be fired at Ohio State.
I can see that. You know, he was
a 2-loss season. Might end his career at Ohio State.
Yeah, he was the one to be groomed for after Meyer left, but who doesn't say that they're grooming Brian Hartline to be his replacement? Like, they have a backup plan. If you're going to be a competitive team like Ohio State has been, they have to have, like, a fail-safe. They have to have a backup.
And I love Ryan Day. I want him around for a long time because I think the way he gets coaches to work together and recruit together is unprecedented from something we've seen. Guys like Nick Saban, they're getting a lot of players at this point on name recognition alone in what they've done. A guy like Ryan Day, who's only been a head coach for 3 years, mind you, he was not a head coach anywhere else. He was brought in here as an assistant behind Zach Smith a couple of years ago before the incident took place, and promoted Brian Hartline to wide receiver coach, forced Urban Meyer out the door, and allowed Ryan Day to take over. So a lot happened to make Ryan Day the guy at Ohio State. His leash is short because he lost to Michigan last year. And he has a great resume so far. And he definitely has time on his side because he's a young coach, and we're entering a new era of college football here in the next few years. But if he doesn't turn this thing around, if he doesn't aim the ship in the right direction, at least from this season with the amount of talent he's acquired, I don't know if I'll take back the statement about him getting fired. That's if he loses those 2 big games, 2 high-profile games on the season. But I think the door at least opens if he doesn't beat Michigan again.
Yeah.
Because
forget
you
that
look
too.
at the last coach at Ohio State who was fired, Earl Bruce in the 90s, was actually a pretty good football coach. Ohio State always had good records, but what couldn't he do? The one knock against Earl Bruce was always he couldn't beat Michigan.
Or they brought in what, John Cooper?
Huh?
Then they brought in John Cooper,
who also couldn't beat Michigan. The one thing at Ohio State, you're going to have good teams. The one precedent is, can you beat Michigan? If you can beat Michigan, you stay around. That is what allowed Jim Tressel to stay for so many years despite winning just the one title in 2002. He got back there. He didn't win it, but he stuck around because he kicked Michigan's A double squiggly letter for a long time. Urban Meyer came in, went undefeated against Jim Harbaugh. Great resumes. The one knock against Ohio State coaches, and the main reason they get shown the door, they can't beat Michigan.
And like Matt just said, it goes both ways too, because what have we been judging Jim Harbaugh in the last couple of years? He couldn't beat Ohio State. What have we been judging James Franklin on? He only beat Ohio State one time, and it was by a block field goal. And other than that, he has been able to beat him.
The next year, that was the year to beat them, and they blew a 28-3 lead.
But this is the thing that in every conference, you're going to have guys that are going to be on the hot seat because they can't beat this team. Look at all these teams in the SEC that can't beat Alabama. I know that sometimes they have slip-ups. For the most part, nobody beats them in the SEC. And all these other teams, like you said, Matt, it's just it's the same thing on both sides of it, that you're going to have hot seats from both sides. Right. Because Ryan Day, if you're saying, Alec, if you can't win those 2 big games, say if he wins those and he slips up against other teams, that's going to screw him too.
Yeah, it does. But especially for Ohio State, Urban Meyer, I'll go with Urban Meyer here. He had the midseason slip-ups, and he was fine because he won the high-profile games.
Yeah,
you can lose a bad game against Iowa or Purdue if you beat Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State in your high-profile out-of-conference game.
Yep.
In the Big Ten title. It all comes down to you can afford to slip up if you make the right moves elsewhere. You have to win the big games to lose the small ones. If you lose a big one, you better make sure you don't lose another one, because that is the ticket to get pushed out of your spot at the top. And that's what Ryan Day did last year. He lost the high-profile game to Oregon. Granted, cut him some slack, a very new first-year quarterback taking the snaps. But that does fall back on the head coach. You didn't have your guy ready to go at the beginning of the season. Only so much you can do about that. You don't really want to throw him under the bus. But you lose your high-profile game to Oregon. You had struggles in the opening game against Minnesota. And then you don't get to the Big Ten championship because you lose to your rival Michigan. And, hey, you also got held to a close one against a 500 Penn State football team. No offense, but Penn State was not at the level Ohio State was last year, and it was still close. Ryan Day's last season, which was really the first year of his guys, did not live up to the standard that he set the 2 years prior.
Well, I think with that loss to Oregon, too, the part that hurt them at the end is that Oregon looked very bad down the stretch.
Yes.
So that's the part that hurt them. Oregon was good early on, but they really fell apart. Like you said, with Penn State, I think that part of it hurt them, too, because although Penn State had a top 5 defense at that time, that's the only reason they were able to stay in it. And I think last year was even though they had a good year last year was a really first year. And like you said, with his first guys, that was the year that they really seemed vulnerable in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
A lot of those games, they were not destroying teams the way that they used to. I know they kicked the crap out of Purdue in that game too, but most of their games last year were close games, which we normally don't see out of them.
And this is the test this year, right? You got second-year quarterback, a guy who was really phenomenal after he took that game off, I believe it was against Catherine, rested his shoulder injury, and then came back and really lit a fire in the rest of the season. And even in the Michigan game that they lost, CJ Stroud was phenomenal throwing the football in that game. Offensively, Ohio State did not have problems against Michigan. It was the defensive side that was straight garbage.
Yep.
So you're bringing back Stroud. You have 3 Heisman favorites on the offensive side in Jackson Smith-Njigba, Travion Henderson, and C.J. Stroud. If Ryan Day can't get it done with this group, not to mention he also has one of the elite pass rushers in football, in Zach Harrison. Well, Harrison doesn't get sacks. His quarterback pressure rating ranks, I believe, third or fourth place in Ohio State history. I think it's third, behind Joey Bosa and Nick Young. So he does have good defensive pieces. He's brought in top-level recruits every year. Ryan Day has to perform. I do believe, personally, Ryan Day will find himself on a hot seat if he does not win this year.
Yeah,
I'm not saying win it all, but you need to get back in the college football playoff, preferably undefeated, maybe one slip up along the way, but it can't be the Michigan and it can't be the Notre Dame.
one final comment here before I get out of here, guys.
Go for it, Matt.
Penn State, this is the year that, Mike, you know this. This is the year they got to make something. They still got Sean Clifford at the helm. I think they should keep him there until otherwise. They have Drew Alar back there. He's a true freshman.
Can I cut you for 1 second here?
Huh?
I think the year we start judging them is the year Drew Alar plays. I'm not giving James Franklin any more passes, but I think that's when we start judging him because that's the guy that they're bringing in to be the guy.
We're going to see the running back this year, I do believe that. What was his name again?
I haven't looked at the list now. I forget now.
I haven't looked in a while, but he was a 5-star recruit as well, so that'll be good. We always got our offensive line. Our defense is always there. I really can't wait to see what Joey Porter Jr. becomes into. I'd like to see him. I know we have the departure of the Jahan Dodson, who was our big wide receiver, but then we just got to find other guys. You know, it was KJ Hamler, then it was Dodson.
Matt, you talked about Nicholas Singleton?
Singleton, yeah.
Singleton will be great. And, you know, more
Hopefully.
defensive guys we have coming in, so we'll just have to see what happens.
I want to see how this defense performs this year without Brent Pry because I'm really upset about
Brent
losing him.
Pry
Good
was
for
a
him
huge
to take my
loss to
job.
Virginia Tech, right?
Yeah.
So he was always a big guy to control everything. So he managed everything. So it's gonna be some new chemistry built. Luckily though, we got some new guys in there that you can start fresh with. You know, man, I can't even think of his name, but you know, I had the big safety get drafted.
Brisker.
Jaquan Brisker, yeah, he's gone now. But I do like the young Joey Porter Jr. out there. So we'll just have to wait and see. I think we should have a promising season. Clifford one more year or so. Let's see if he can bring them home.
Like I said, I think to me, I understand the criticism with James Franklin if he doesn't do things here because I'm one to criticism too. But yeah. I think the reason why he's not on the hot seat this year is because they just gave him a contract over the offseason.
They gave him like a 10-year one.
After Clifford is done this year, because this is his last year, that's when you're going to have these guys, these quarterbacks, Drew Alar, other guys they brought in. They brought in some really good talent.
Oh, yeah.
Then if, like I said last year at the end of the year, if he can't get it done with those guys, then I could see moving on from him.
Yep, I can too. But all right, guys, I'm going to dip out of here.
All right, Matt. Have a happy birthday, man.
Birthday.
Enjoy the weather. All right, Mike. So I want to keep it going here on the Penn State side of things because I think it is an interesting discussion, especially because, as you mentioned, Penn State just gave James Franklin a massive 10-year deal. But in your opinion, as a Penn State fan, does Franklin deserve a 10-year contract? That's a long time.
It's a long time.
Penn State likes having one guy. We're going to work with one guy. That's just the way they did it. I mean, they let Paterno run things for 50 years through ups and downs. Do you think they're going to afford the same liberties to James Franklin? Is he a lifetime coach at Penn State? Does he deserve those 10 years to start him out?
I think the reason why I think it was 10 years is because we saw teams that wanted him with LSU and I forget the other one that wanted him too. But I think it was a little bit of desperation move. I think they wanted to keep him too. They wanted him to be that guy because he's a Pennsylvania guy. He's talked about when he first got there and all the they have not had many coaches throughout their history. Like you said, they had Joe Paterno, some other guys in front of them that weren't bad, but that prime of Penn State football was Joe Paterno. And what's his fate? The one that used to coach the Texans, Bill O'Brien. He was there for like 2 years, but that was just a bridge year. So they get their guy with James Franklin. I think
to the NFL that Matt's very salty about to this day.
Yeah, but I think it was a bit of a desperation move, to be honest, with the 10 years. I get extending him, but that's a long period of time. But I think that's why I just said this year, I don't think he's a hot seat type of guy within the Big Ten, and especially in college football, because they just gave him that deal. And he's brought in these guys that, like, this has been his best recruiting year since he's been there. So that part of it, like I said, I think Penn State also thinks the same way to see him work with these guys. And I think that's the part because, Sean Clifford coming back this year, I think it's going to be good to see him back healthy because last year, most of the year, he was not healthy. That was part of the problem. And, I don't know how much of a big deal that's going to be, but Drew Alar is the best quarterback recruit they've had come in a while now. So I think that's part of the reason why they want to see him work with these guys.
Yeah, I mean, 3 5-star guys this season, along with 18 13, pardon me, 4-star guys, 9 3-stars with a total point of 278.66, number 2 in the Big Ten, number 6 overall in the country, brought in 25 commits this year. I agree with, I think the fact that he's not on the hot seat this year, but I think he should be because
he's always going to be.
The 10-year contract is the piece that he can't be on a hot seat because he's got that big deal in place. But I feel like at some point, while he does have the deal, the seat is still going to be very warm the whole time because and the biggest thing for me, I keep coming back to it, the super conferences that we're moving into. These mega conferences of 16 teams in the Big Ten with USC bringing in Lincoln Riley. Keep in mind, Lincoln Riley, one of the other best offensive. We're going to have the 2 best offensive minds in all of college football in Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day in the Big Ten. If you think Penn State's going to sit back and allow those two to run dominant offense all over them, especially on a Penn State team that is historically defensive. Defense has always been the key for Penn State football. They win big when they have offense, but they've always had defense. And you're right, the Drew Allar here is really when we need to start looking at this team. But I got to keep putting out here that as great as James Franklin has recruited, does he ever bring in all of it at once?
No.
Because it feels like, oh, he's got Drew Allar. Well, what else is he going to have? Is he going to have an elite wide receiver? He brought in 4-star Caden Saunders out of Westerville, Ohio. A recruit left Ohio means most likely it's because Ohio State and Cincinnati didn't want him. That's a big thing of it. Penn State steals a lot of guys out of Ohio, so does Michigan, that Ohio State doesn't even ever look at. That's why Drew Allar went Penn State, because Ohio State pulled off of him when they got the Quinn Ewers recruit. And that was a big thing. They found quarterbacks. They pulled off of Drew Allar, stopped even communicating with him. That was a great pickup for Penn State to grab the top prospect pretty much in all of Ohio. I mean, a 98.52 rating as a 5-star prospect. And you're going to have Nick Singleton as the running back, Kane Saunders wide receiver. You're also bringing in Katrin Allen, another 4-star running back, 12th in the nation. But my biggest thing, we see great recruiting classes. It's never all at once, though. These guys don't turn out as big as they're supposed to. And, I mean, I think you can see this at Ohio State. The top recruits aren't always the best recruits.
That's true.
Same thing in Clemson. Same thing at Alabama. Just because you're bringing in a guy that's number 1 overall doesn't mean he's actually the best.
It's all about system and fit and play style. That's all it's about.
That is the biggest thing. And you look at Penn State, this is a really great class, and I want to see if it works out for them. Probably next season is when you're going to see most of these guys get those moves. But development, it's the same thing that haunted Jim Harbaugh for a while. Development of players. We hadn't seen until this last season Jim Harbaugh develop players to the next level. Penn State, they've had a little bit better development under James Franklin, but it's still nowhere near the level of Ohio State, and it probably never will be. But James Franklin on a 10-year deal has to start showing that he can develop those players and put these players in the best situations. Situational football for Penn State has been their downfall. You look at everything the last 8 years under him, their biggest wins and their biggest losses came in situational football games. It wasn't big blowouts. Penn State didn't really have massive blowouts along the way. They won close games thanks to their defense and above average play offensively. And most of that win was because Saquon Barkley was an absolute dog. And that's what helped James Franklin do a 67-34 record in his 8 years so far at Penn State. I like James Franklin. I think he's a great coach. But I do think there's a lot of question marks out there. And you talk about bringing in Nick Singleton, a 5-star running back this year. Is it even going to matter? Because we saw this team last year with Noah Kane and Kayvon Lee, 2 pretty good running backs that barely got any carries.
Bad offensive line last year.
What?
Bad offensive line last year. That was half the reason.
Half the reason, but at the same time, that still falls on James Franklin.
It does. I agree.
Together an offensive line. And that's why I say bring in Nick Singleton. Is it even going to matter? Because, I mean, you still got a lot of the same guys on that offensive line. Sure, they probably improved in the offseason. At least you hope. But is Singleton going to get carries? Because Kane and Lee, they got no carries. They showed big flashes a couple of times, but there was no consistent running game. Is a change up at running back with Nick Singleton, if they even make that move. I think part of it, you're going to have 2-3 running back system again with Penn State, which I don't hate. I do think they work well as a multi-running back system. Situational football, again, for Penn State has always been a big thing. But I don't know if the Nick Singleton recruit is going to matter because James Franklin sometimes doesn't know how to use his players correctly. I think maybe is the biggest way to go. Brings in great players. They have great moments, but they don't always get used in the right way at Penn State.
I think the biggest thing that just comes down to with James Franklin is not, look at these games against, I'll use it because I keep telling you, Ohio State is a standard in the Big Ten. That's why I keep bringing them up because that's what you're shooting for. If you look at the games they play against Ohio State since the last time they beat them in 2016, I think it was, all these games are close. They all come down to questionable calls at the end. That's the biggest thing, that they are right there. And I think that the frustrating part is they've been knocking on the door too long. And as fans, it gets frustrating because sometimes they play well in the big games and sometimes they win the big games. It's a game they should win that they slip up on. Last year, Illinois, they slipped up on them. I think, the year before, the 1 year after they lost to Ohio State, they lost to Michigan State when Michigan State was the worst team in the conference. I think that's the biggest thing for them. And with the team this year, on paper, yes, they should be a lot better because Sean Clifford, he played decently last year considering the injuries. He played good enough for them to be in games, although they didn't win them. But all the games they played last year, they're pretty much in it and gave themselves a chance to win. I know they don't have Jahan Dotson this year, but
the one transfer I like coming over, wide receiver one, most likely day one.
And I like the transit or the guy that got to switch over from Western Kentucky was Mitchell Tinsley last year, who had a good year for them last year. And I forget his stat line, but he had a record-breaking year that I read for Western Kentucky last year. So that's a good guy to come in and bring number one. Parker Washington's still going to be there. And I know I just talked about the defense, losing Brett Pry as a D coordinator, but having Joey Porter there does a lot for them because I know they lost Jaquan Brisker, but having Joey Porter there last year who played really well and was one of the better defenders last year, that's a guy that although you're going to have a different defensive system, but you have a voice there that was there last year for the young guys that are coming up this year that Brent Pry isn't there to provide. But with overall though, with what you're saying with James Franklin is 100% correct because that's my biggest criticism on him. I don't know who they're going to get that's better than him. That's my biggest stance that I've been saying since he's been on the hot seat the last year or two.
Right.
But they're not going to get anybody that's better than him, I don't think, as of right now, unless somebody emerges and they see somebody else better that they can try to get into Penn State. But we don't know that. And I think that's the thing, that's the 10-year contract. I'm not saying that's why he shouldn't be on the hot seat but I'm just saying giving him a couple years because they gave him a big deal like that. And they've had a slip up the last couple of years. That COVID year, they were bad. Last year, they were unhealthy. They had a lot of injuries. I don't really like to blame injuries on losses, but they were pretty hammered last year with injuries. I think PJ Mustipher, he's coming back this year too as well. After that, that's big because that was a big loss for them last year. But
yeah, it was.
It was a very big loss. And again, I'm not saying Sean Clifford's a big guy because I have my own question marks on him too. But having him healthy this year for his last year should really help them a lot and help the young guys that are behind him.
I agree. How about we go ahead and take a look at Penn State's schedule this year? We're going to do some more breakdowns as we get closer to the football season. I believe, what are we down, 50 days, Mike?
Yeah.
6 weeks, something.
Yep.
I mean, we're not too far off from starting this college football season out, and you guys get the start on September 1st, a Thursday game, Big Ten, 8 p.m. game on Fox in West Lafayette against Purdue. Really a big game to start the season, despite the fact, Purdue isn't great, but they were a 9-4 team last year. I think you got to remember that. They only allowed 198 points defensively in those 13, or they've allowed 291 points all in all in those 13 games, which was a pretty bad mark. They don't have a great defense, but offensively, they put up almost 400 points. They were the best offensive team in the Big Ten West last season, and they finished basically tied for second in the Big Ten West. It was the most competitive the Big Ten West has been in a while, and it still wasn't half as good as the Big Ten East, but not the point of this discussion. Game 1 for Penn State against Purdue. Mike, I'm not going to lie to you. I think if there's a bet, especially starting the season at home, I think there's a good chance Purdue starts Penn State's season out with an upset.
That's fair.
A Thursday night game. Big situation, West Lafayette night game. That crowd gets raucous in Purdue, especially to start out a year where they were coming off a 9-win season. I do think that the momentum has been pushed forward. Jeff Brom did a phenomenal job with this team last year. He had a losing record in his first 4 seasons at this school, then goes 9-4 last year. He still has a losing record in 5 years, but his hot seat rating went from a 3 down to a 1 between these 2 seasons. This could be a big step for Purdue And they got you guys marked in red to start out the season because I have a feeling they feel if they come in with a win against Penn State, it sets up a great season to propel their team into the top of the Big Ten West. They have you guys marked in red there, pardon me, and Penn State might be not looking ahead, but I think their first big game they're looking at is against Michigan in Ann Arbor on October 15th. I know that's a long way off from the start of the season, but we've seen trap games like this before, especially at the start of a year. You're a team that was 500 last season, 500 season before that. You have to find something new for this Penn State squad and something to build off of. Purdue's coming off of a very productive season. They're doing a blackout against you in game one. I got Purdue as the favorite in that game to start things out. And I like Penn State, and I hope things work out. But one, I also am not trusting Sean Clifford as your quarterback. He's played well enough, but he's not up there as one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten, I'll put it this way. Probably have him in the top half, but that's not saying a lot because the Big Ten does not have great quarterbacks at the moment outside of Ohio State.
Yeah, I'm kind of weird with Sean Clifford. I like him. I think he's done more than people give him credit for. Not in terms of what he plays, not like what the results have been. But
right, because the results for him are 11-11 in 2 years.
Yeah, so. I think it's on him. He's on the field too, but it's like I said, it's also on some of the coaching staff too, and the coordinator last year because you got to put these guys in positions to win and make the right calls late in games. And I think with Purdue, you guys know I'm a favorite of my team, but I think with Purdue,
you're aiming for an undefeated season here, Big Ten championship, college football playoff.
Well, that's what you have.
If you're going predicting game by game, you're not picking your team to lose. Basically, is what's going on.
Well, that's true. But I mean, in my head, I know that the games that I think they're going to lose, but I'm still going to pick them anyways. But what the thing is, that's what you expect is whether they've had 500 years the last 2 years or not. When you're a team like them. That's the thing that you have to have that standard because that's what college football is. You pretty much have to be perfect. That's why it's the hardest thing to do. Perfect, you can have one slip up, but sometimes one slip up costs you, depending on who it is. But with Purdue coming in, I think they did lose a big part of their offense with David Bell last year. And again, it's college football. You have teams guys step up behind them. We'll see who's capable of doing that. But that was a big part of their offense last year, and that's the one thing that scares me. I think it's the part that last year with Penn State opened up in Wisconsin. I know they were able to find a way to win that, but that's the hard thing about these environments because Purdue's one of the most more ruckus ones, like you said, they're doing the blackout. They're always into these games, no matter if they're good or bad. That's a good start to the season. And I think that even though Penn State had to decline last year after the first couple weeks, that was a real good, feel-good thing to start in Wisconsin with the win last year. And I think that plays just as ruckus as Purdue is. And if they could do that this year, who knows? We'll see. Because I know Auburn's not great, but that's still a hard place to play down in the SEC. They're just as hardcore as everybody else is too. But after that, Northwestern had that little bit of slip off too. I'm just looking through their schedule here, just kind of summarizing things. Michigan, that's a hard one to go to. That's their biggest road game in the Big Ten, probably.
Yeah, I was going to look through this. Obviously, Ohio and Auburn should be wins. So is Central Michigan. I am interested, though, with Northwestern because if you look at historical records with Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern, he has a very roller coaster-esque up and down record. But if you look at it, he is projected, based on stats, to have one of those up years of his at Northwestern. They didn't pull in a great recruiting class, so it might turn that around. But statistically speaking, Northwestern is due for one of their big seasons here this year. If that holds true, it could be a fun game in Happy Valley to start off October in what might be your hardest month of football. Well, actually, what is definitely your hardest month of football. That is a gauntlet. And luckily, 3 of those are at home, but that's still going to be very hard to accomplish for Penn State going up against Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio State, and Northwestern.
And you just talked about Purdue circling Ohio or Penn State on the schedule. Every year, if you're at Penn State, you have to circle Ohio State. Home or away, that's what you have to do to be in the conversation, get in the Big Ten title game, and win it and get in the playoff. That's the one you got to circle there at the end of the month because you have it at home this year. I know Ohio State's shown the last couple of times they've played there that they can walk in and win, even though this game's not going to be a whiteout, which is unfortunate because I wanted to go to this game. I still might go to it, but that's why I wanted to go because it's a whiteout. But anyway.
It's a stripe out now instead.
And it's at noon, which sucks, but it still says to be announced, but they said it's going to be at noon. But that's the one you got to circle. the latter part of their schedule at the end, that's not easy, but it should be favorable with Indiana, Maryland, Rutgers, and then Michigan State's hard to finish out too if they could, find a way
see.
to.
I don't know what Mel Tucker is going to do. I think in the Big Ten overall, Mel Tucker is the biggest question mark this season because he was so successful last year because of the fact that he had Kenneth Walker III. Because Kenneth Walker was a phenomenal football talent and one of the best we've seen come out of Michigan State in a long time. And to have that for just 1 year, you wonder, is Mel Tucker going to be able to keep that standard up? Because first year was not good for him. I mean, it was a losing record, and then they come back the next season and you get 11 wins. So up and downs for sure. I think all in all, to finish out the season, that Michigan State game, it'll be either the biggest game to finish out the year for Penn State potentially, or a complete dud that you run over the entire month of November. You shouldn't have any problems. But back to that Ohio State matchup, there's a chance that Penn State comes in 7-0, 6-1, 5-2, or 4-3. In my opinion, Penn State to come into that point can be all over the board.
Yeah.
There is no guarantee with Penn State because we don't know what we're getting this year out of them because they've been so bad the last 2 years under Sean Clifford. I wouldn't say up and down. They've been bad the last 2 years with Sean Clifford at the helm, and blame it on defense, blame it on offensive line all you want. That's the guy that you expect to lead a team. Quarterback. It's always up to the quarterback in college football, especially to lead that team, to get this team where it needs to be. A lot of times falls on the quarterback position. Sean Clifford hasn't been able to elevate the team at all. And yes, the defense has been a big part to blame for that. Losing Mustafa in the third, fourth game of the season last year, that was a big hit as well for Penn State's defensive side. And still, they were a bad team, despite the fact they had one of the top-rated defenses in college football. It didn't matter because Penn State inconsistencies are there. And as an Ohio State fan, I don't think I circle Penn State this year because they
probably don't. But
they got Sean Clifford, their best wide receivers, Parker Washington. I like that. Ohio State should have a new defensive scheme and defensive backs in place to take care of Washington. The offensive line is still mediocre. Minimal improvements. Minimal. You hope for more. But in all reality, how much better are you really getting in one off season on an offensive line standard? Running game, James Franklin abandoned the running game last year. I don't know if he's going to get back to it. I hope he does because Penn State is their best when they can run the football. And if you look at Ohio State and teams that beat them, the only way to beat Ohio State is to have a balanced offense. You need to be able to throw well and pass well, and you need a decent defense to beat Ohio State. This year, I don't think Penn State has balance. They didn't have it last year. They didn't have it the year before. Ohio State took care of business, even if it was close. As a Buckeye fan, I am not circling Penn State on the board this season. Not when we have a high-profile game against Notre Dame to start. Not when we got the revenge game against Michigan to finish out the season. There's too much else to look at to focus on a team that went 7-6 the prior season. That's one big thing. To me, as a Buckeye fan, Penn State could get Ohio State into a trap game because I don't think Ohio State is going to focus on them as much. The benefit is this is holiday weekend. October 29th, this Halloween weekend is the perfect matchup for Ohio State and Penn State. I love it. I hope they always try and keep this as the final game of October because it's really fit in there well. Both teams normally come in playing their best football to finish out the month of October. They're both looking great, which is why we've had competitive games. But as I said, I'm not overly worried about Penn State coming in this year, and even though it's in Happy Valley, upsetting us.
If I'm an Ohio State fan too, like you are, from that standpoint, I wouldn't worry about them either because, like you said, the two games they have, and I think that there's two home games they have too that are going to be pretty interesting with Wisconsin and Iowa coming in too, because I know that they're having some big Scarlet out and stuff like that for the Iowa game, which I know that worked for them last year.
Yeah, things are going big for them starting out the season. They're going to be honoring 20th anniversary team. Jim Tressel expected to make an appearance potentially coming from Youngstown, going down to Columbus, expected to make an appearance with the team for the 20th anniversary. They're doing a blackout early in the season. I think it was against Rutgers. Maybe
I think it's against Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah, Wisconsin, I believe, because I think it's going to be a noon game they're doing a blackout for, which kind of stinks. Then Scarlet out against Iowa as expected on the ledger. So there's going to be some big games before it, and I think that's one of the reasons why Penn State's not on the forefront of Buckeye minds this year. I do think Ohio State has to be careful, though, when you do come into that game because it's Happy Valley, it's Penn State. If Penn State at that point is, a 6-1 team or even 5-2, heck, even if they're 4-3 at this point, it's still a team you have to watch out for. It's going to be called the trap game because of those Wisconsin and Iowa games prior to it.
Yeah, and like I said, from Penn State's standpoint, that is their biggest game, and that's the one they have to circle, and that's the team that James Franklin keeps getting criticized for not beating. So from every year, Penn State's going to have them circled on the calendar, no matter who they play.
But like you said, I think Penn State this season, I think they're going to be more focused on beating Ohio State than Michigan. Because of the criticisms James Franklin has for not being able to beat Ohio State. He's shown he can beat Michigan with a good team. And if this team turns out to be good, they're going to be going for Michigan. But if that becomes the case, but I think this year, based off of what we know, the bare minimum of what we know, the biggest game for Penn State is going to be going up against Ohio State because of what you just talked about, his lack of ability to beat that team.
And the big thing too, and like I said, I don't like to really blame injuries too much, but when it does happen, it's worth bringing up because, like I said, and a lot considering everything they had last year, and this is one of the biggest what ifs last year to me, not just because it's my team, but throughout college football last year, because for most of the year, Sean Clifford's hurt. Even though he played through it, he was still out there. You got to get it done. Yeah. You still have to go out there and play, even though if you're out there. I said the same thing with Baker last year. You're hurt all you want, but you're out there. You still have to get it done if you're going to try to play. He wasn't able to. PJ Musfer was out last year, like I said. Some other guys that had injured as well. That has to be one of the biggest what ifs last year because they were in every game last year. Every game, pretty much. They almost beat Iowa on the road. That's the game.
I'm going to jump this just a little bit. Biggest what if. My biggest what if. What if Nebraska had a defense? That's my biggest what if.
I'm saying Penn State had that stuff last year. Right. Whether they would have been successful, healthy or not, it's just something to think about because they were in that game against Ohio. They should have won. I'll sit here and say they should have won that game against Ohio State. There were some things they gave away at the end of the game that was their fault. And if they didn't do that, they might actually end up on top. I don't know if they would have, but it looked on the eye test. It looked like they could have. They almost beat Michigan at home, and I think they only lost by like 3 points. They were close, even though they were hurt. So I just want to see what happens this year. I'm not expecting it to be a great year, but I just want to see if they're healthy, what they can do.
My only thing when you talk about, going back last year real quick on this, the Penn State, Ohio State. Penn State should have won. I'm
not saying there was things that could have made it in their favor if they didn't give it away. Ohio State probably would have won it anyways, but I'm just saying.
My thing, Ohio State, they didn't really pull away. They scored a late touchdown. They were outscored in the second half for the majority until that final touchdown, or final, I think, 2 field goals in that game. That first half was awful for Penn State. The biggest thing for them, they started terrible in a lot of football games, and they were having to play from behind a lot of times last year. They have to avoid that this year. That's probably the biggest thing for Penn State.
They couldn't score last year.
Yeah. Well, all right. Let's take a step out of here, college football. We'll get back to it. We got a lot of weeks to go over every single team in college football, talk about them, and beat that horse for a long time. How about we go to maybe one of the most exciting news of the week? This is actually going to be my highlight of the week, Mike. I'm gonna jump this out early here. College basketball is going back to the water. The first aircraft carrier game since 2012 will be taking place between Gonzaga and Michigan State. So obviously I'm also loving that this is going to be Big Ten action. November 11th, ESPN's Armed Forces Classic. They're going to be putting this thing on the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln on Veterans Day. This is awesome. This is what we want. I mean, we haven't seen this in obviously a decade. It's been a long time. And Michigan State was one of those teams that had played in this style of game before. It shouldn't be a problem for them, to get guys ready because Tom Izzo knows what he's going into. But I got to put this out. I love seeing college basketball getting back to this because I think they were kind of starting to, lose a little bit of energy with college basketball. I think sometimes you need a gimmick just to get people re-enthused about something, especially that start of the season. Nobody's paying attention to college basketball until you hit maybe February. That first month, 2 months of basketball is hardly worth watching in college basketball because most of the time it means nothing.
Well, they should be
a lot last year. Start of the season, it meant nothing.
The first few weeks are actually, I think, are worth paying attention to because you get these out of conference matchups that are pretty much all good ones that you should pay attention to. Gonzaga, Michigan State, that's a fun one to watch, and especially with the location, like you said. I remember that first one back in 2012. That watching on TV, that was just cool to see it outside because you don't see it often. And if you're sitting here, not to get a little bit off topic, but if you're sitting here as somebody that lives in this country, that's just sick to have a basketball game on that type of environment. On Veterans Day, like you said, you can't ask for anything better than that.
Right.
But
it should be a very, very fun matchup. That's going to be my highlight of the week. It's probably going to be my highlight of the week on November for Veterans Day as well, unless, of course, Ohio State goes big time that week.
Which they could.
Right.
Probably will.
Yeah, there's a good chance at it. Mike, how about you go ahead, throw out your highlight of the week here as well. What do you got?
Since I don't have one right now, I guess I'll just go back to what I brought off the show because it's the first time it happened in the Statcast era was that throw by O'Neal Cruz.
I think you got a lot to be excited for with that team in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, not this year, but
well, it was looking better at the start. You're falling behind, sure, but what's to say a big run here in the night? Post All-Star run couldn't turn things around for you guys. You got I think you got things to look forward to because you got a lot of young talents that you're moving in.
That's what I was going to say, but I got the two things that I wanted to bring up with that is that. That's the thing with like you said with the young talent, bringing them in, that's fine. You're going to lose games, but with O'Neal Cruz, that just doesn't happen. And I think that's the reason why he needs to play shortstop. I know people question about with his size, he's tall to move into the outfield. You have that type of arm. That guy needs to play shortstop. That's going to take away a lot of close plays at first base that normally a lot of people don't make, and guys end up being safe.
He's a very special talent. O'Neal Cruz. So long as he stays healthy and doesn't ever injure that arm, throwing it that hard, there's a good chance. I mean, something wild happens, or that elbow deteriorates. We see it with pitchers all the time. Tommy John surgery. It's a very real possibility. You just hope it never happens.
And by the way, if he sticks at shortstop, which I think he should, you're gonna have O'Neal Cruz at shortstop and Brian Hayes third base. Good luck in anything on the left side of the infield, getting through both them guys, because. Brian Hayes covers ground that so easily that a lot of guys end up diving for balls and they can't even get them. So that if them two guys end up on that side of the infield together, good luck getting anything through because it's not going to happen.
All right. Well, we do actually have some news as well out of the NFL, but as we take a step aside here from baseball, Mitchell Schwartz, 4-time All-Pro corner or defensive back, spent career with the Browns and Chiefs, has announced his retirement after 9 years in the NFL, and Cowboys tight end Dalton Schultz and Dallas are not expected to reach an agreement on a contract extension before Friday's 4 p.m. deadline for franchise players. So big news there, Mike. Your tight end.
That'd be a significant loss there.
Coming back around.
That's worth noting there too, because they're going to have a totally different offense too as well, just like as we talked about the Browns are going to.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess going back to when we were talking about this, I think it was last week when we were talking about Cowboys at the Vision, and Cowboys seem like the shoe-in to win the NFC East unless Carson Wentz or Jalen Hurts absolutely does amazing in either Philly or Washington. Those are the two likely candidates to maybe pull an upset somewhere. I will never pick the New York Giants to win anything. I don't care if they're an undefeated football team. The only thing I'd pick them to do was for Danny Jones to throw a pick, because that's all I think he's capable of at the quarterback position, besides having a good run where he trips over his own feet. And that pretty much summarized the entire franchise over the last couple of seasons for New York. So I think maybe, if you see a couple more offensive changeups and you see them kind of struggle out the gate, I think it really opens the door for Philly to come in and steal the division away. Especially, as we noted when talking about that, NFC East hasn't had a repeat champion in over a decade.
I think this may be the year we see it, but like you said, if the Cowboys don't start out fast, they're going to be trying in this phase. They're going to be trying to find themselves, like I said, because they lost some guys on offense. Their offensive line, they lost Collins and some other guys on their offensive line. So if they start out slow, that's going to leave the door open for Philly, who had a good free agency and draft as well. So we can see what Jalen Hurts does with a lot of guys around him.
Yep. All right, let's finish out the show. One final little segment here. Mike, what's your thoughts on the Kevin Durant situation running out of Brooklyn? What are your thoughts right now? Because there's been a lot of back and forth between Adam Silver saying he doesn't like players requesting trades, which I'll go ahead and put my side out here. That's total BS. If teams can go out here and trade players away freely, trash talk them, have their owners trash talk them, throw them out here like they're yesterday's news. Why can't players do the same? That is the biggest L I think Adam Silver's taken as the commissioner of the NBA. He's a phenomenal commissioner. This is probably the first time I've really hated something he said.
I think the part I think he's wrong in saying, or that he should have clarified at least, because this is my stance on it. You can request trades. I don't have a problem with that. But I think it's just getting the nature of the business is that's why they call it when guys get traded. It's a business.
Right.
That's what's going to happen when you're GMs too. But I think that with guys requesting trades, I think it's just happening often and often and often. They just don't. If they're there and one little thing goes bad, they're the first ones to want to run out the door. Like you sign. That's my thing. That's different. The difference with me is with GMs is being able to trade guys because that's their job. These guys sign extensions, 4 years extensions, and after 1 year with Kevin Durant, he just signed an extension last year. He wants to go out already. That's my biggest thing. Is when the minute something goes wrong, they want out.
I agree with that part, but I do think, is it so wrong as a player to be able to request that trade and go, hey, I don't want to be here anymore? I don't have a problem with that side of it. The only problem I might have the only thing I might have a problem with is if the player sits out, like James Harden did, like Ben Simmons did.
Yeah.
If you sit out and you're avoiding doing the job that you're getting paid for, that's where I have the issue. I don't have the issue of players freely requesting trades. I love free agency. I love the player movement that we have in today's basketball game. I know a lot of old heads, especially, don't like, oh, well, we had lifetime players on our teams. Who cares? Who cares if you had a lifetime player? This is different. I mean, businesses used to have a lot of people work at their company for 30 plus years. Now people are realizing, well, why would I stay here for this long if I have a better situation just across the street? That's what we're seeing in basketball more often. These players realize, why would I stay in a crummy situation if I can get paid more, be more successful, and get a lot more benefits over here at this other company? If we say it's a business and then we don't treat the players like employees. That's the biggest thing. If this is a business, those are employees. They can come and go when they want, but you still have to show up and do your job until you move on.
That's my biggest thing. That's been my whole view on this from the beginning. You might not agree with this, but this is where I've been. You sign an extension, you got to fill it out. You signed up to commit for 4 years. Something goes wrong, whatever. I don't agree with the sitting out part you said. If guys want to request trades, that's fine. But don't throw big hissy fits like James Harden did, like Ben Simmons did, where I'm not going to play. And if you do play, you're just going to stink on purpose. You signed that extension. You wanted to be there. That's my thing right there. You have to be. You signed it.
I don't disagree that you signed up to do this thing, but at the same time, I mean, if the company you work for, they also signed half that contract. Half that contract came from the company. And if they're going to trade you away, why can't you basically go and do the same thing? I know that's the GM's jobs, but they signed the other half of that contract. They committed to you for 4 years. They committed to pay to you for 4 years, and now they're showing you the door. Why can't a player do the same? That's all we got time for here today. Mike, we'll let you rebuttal that on tomorrow's opening show if you want.
It's a good conversation.
We're out of time. Power Hour coming up next on YSNLive.com. We'll see you tomorrow. Wrap out the show. One final time, Matt, if you're still watching, happy birthday, man. Hope you enjoy the weather down there. But we'll see you tomorrow.